What happens? When an undercover CEO walks into his own fast food chain and hears what his staff reveals about management. The sun was barely rising when Daniel Prescott parked his car a block away from one of his own fast food chain locations. As the CEO of Griddle King, Daniel had built his business from the ground up, turning it into a household name. But recently, complaints about management had started flooding in. Employees feeling mistreated, rumors of toxic supervisors, and whispers of corner cutting that endangered both staff and customers. Daniel couldn't ignore it any longer. Dressed in a plain black shirt and worn-out jeans, Daniel walked into the store unnoticed. He'd shaved his signature salt and pepper beard down to heavy stubble, and a baseball cap hid his normally well-kept hair. He wasn't here as the CEO. He was here as Dave, a new employee training for an entry-level position. Inside, the morning rush had already started. Customers lined up, their hurried footsteps squeaking against the floor. The air smelled of sizzling bacon and hot coffee, but the tension behind the counter was impossible to miss. A cashier, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes, struggled to punch orders into the register while a customer berated her over a mistake. "I said no cheese. Are you even listening?" the man barked, his voice rising above the chatter. I'm sorry, I can fix it right away," the cashier stammered, her voice shaking. Before Daniel could step in, a loud voice from the back roared, "You think we have time for your screw-ups, Alyssa?" A tall, imposing man in a manager's uniform stormed forward. His name tag read, Rick. "If you can't keep up, maybe you don't belong here." Alyssa's face flushed red as she rushed to fix the customer's order. Rick turned to Daniel, clearly irritated. "You the new guy?" "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, masking his anger. "Good. Don't mess things up like her," Rick muttered, jerking his thumb toward Alyssa. Daniel's first task was on the grill, cooking breakfast sandwiches. As he worked, he kept an eye on Rick. The manager constantly barked orders, snapping at employees over minor mistakes. When Alyssa dropped a napkin holder, Rick was on her in seconds. "That's coming out of your pay," Rick snarled. Daniel's fists clenched around his spatula. The napkin holder barely made a sound, yet Rick treated her like she'd shattered glass. Worse, the rest of the staff moved like ghosts, heads down, avoiding Rick's gaze. During break, Daniel found Alyssa sitting alone in the corner of the staff room, her head down against the table. "Rough morning?" Daniel asked gently, setting his tray beside her. Alyssa sniffed and wiped her eyes. "It's always like this," she muttered. "Rick treats us like dirt, and the district manager never shows up to check on things." Daniel frowned. "Have you told anyone?" Alyssa let out a bitter laugh. "No one listens. I filed a complaint last month. The only thing that changed was my hours. Rick cut them in half." Before Daniel could reply, Rick's voice bellowed from the kitchen. "Break's over. Get moving." Hours passed, and Daniel saw the same grim pattern unfold. Employees scared to ask questions, flinching whenever Rick appeared. One worker, Jose, was limping, but continued to haul boxes from the storage room without complaint. "You okay?" Daniel asked him quietly. "I'll be fine," Jose muttered. "Told Rick I needed time off for my ankle. He said I'd better work through it or find a new job." Daniel's heart sank. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was abuse. As the shift neared its end, Daniel was wiping down counters when Rick stormed in again. This time, he singled out a quiet teenager named Marcus, accusing him of stealing fries. Marcus stood frozen, terrified. "I didn't take anything," Marcus pleaded. "Don't lie to me," Rick spat. "I'll dock your pay for wasting inventory." That was it. Daniel couldn't stay silent anymore. "Maybe you should check the cameras before blaming him," Daniel interrupted. Rick turned sharply, sizing Daniel up. "Mind your own business, new guy." "I am," Daniel shot back. "This place runs on these employees. They deserve better than this." Rick's face twisted in fury. "You think you know better? You won't last a week here." "Maybe," Daniel replied. "But if you keep treating people like this, neither will you." Rick stormed off, But Daniel knew this wasn't over. He had seen enough. His employees were suffering, and now it was time to do something about it. Daniel arrived early the next morning, this time determined to uncover the full truth about what was happening at his restaurant. As he walked through the employee entrance, he noticed Rick standing by the time clock, arms crossed, scowling at Alyssa and Marcus as they punched in. "Don't think about slacking today," Rick barked. "I need this place spotless before the district manager comes by. If you screw up, that's on your paycheck." Alyssa and Marcus exchanged anxious glances and quickly rushed off to their stations. Daniel gritted his teeth. Rick's toxic behavior had poisoned the entire store, and he knew things likely ran deeper than what he'd seen on the surface. More than just fear. Mid-morning, Daniel was assigned to work alongside Marcus at the fryer station. As they quietly battered chicken strips and dropped them into sizzling oil, Marcus glanced over his shoulder toward the manager's office where Rick sat, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. "Why's everyone so scared of him?" Daniel asked quietly. Marcus snorted under his breath. "Because Rick makes sure you're miserable if you speak up. Alyssa complained last month, so now he dumps all the worst shifts on her. Closing shifts, back-to-back doubles. She barely gets a day off anymore." "And Jose?" Daniel asked. "His ankle's killing him, but he's still here," Rick told him. "If he takes time off, he's done," Marcus whispered. "He's terrified of losing his job. Jose's got 2 kids. Daniel's heart sank. "What about you?" Marcus's face darkened. "I keep my mouth shut." "That's no way to live," Daniel muttered. "Yeah, well," Marcus shrugged. "Not everyone's got a choice." The break room confession. Later that afternoon, Daniel overheard quiet sobbing coming from the break room. When he stepped inside, he found Alyssa sitting alone, her face buried in her hands. "You okay?" Daniel asked softly. She flinched, then wiped her face and forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." "Doesn't seem like it." Alyssa hesitated. Maybe it was Daniel's calm tone, or maybe she was too exhausted to pretend anymore. But suddenly everything poured out. "I'm drowning," she confessed. "I'm behind on rent because Rick keeps cutting my hours. I pick up extra shifts wherever I can, but he always finds a way to screw me over. Last week, he sent me home 2 hours early because I wasn't fast. Enough. He said I didn't deserve the full shift." "That's not fair," Daniel said, anger boiling inside him. "Fair doesn't matter," Alyssa muttered. "Rick does whatever he wants. No one stops him." Catching Rick in the act, Daniel knew he needed evidence. Later that evening, he stayed late under the guise of helping Marcus clean the back storage room. From the supply racks, he had a clear view of Rick standing by the registers, watching the clock like a hawk. At exactly 7:30 p.m., just before Marcus's shift was supposed to end, Rick marched to his station. "Clock out now," Rick ordered. "But I still have 30 minutes left," Marcus protested. "Not anymore," Rick sneered. "I'm cutting your time. We went over budget this week." "That's not how this works," Daniel said firmly, stepping forward. Rick's eyes narrowed. "I told you to mind your business. And I'm telling you that you're breaking the law," Daniel snapped. "You're stealing wages, forcing people off the clock but making them keep working." "You don't know what you're talking about," Rick spat. "I've been running this store for 5 years. I know how to hit my numbers." "Yeah?" Daniel shot back. "By threatening your staff, by intimidating Jose into working injured, by humiliating Alyssa and cutting her shifts to punish her." Rick's face twisted with rage. "You think some trainee's going to tell me how to run my store?" "I'm not a trainee," Daniel said quietly. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his CEO badge and held it up. "I'm the owner." For a moment, the entire room seemed to freeze. Marcus's eyes widened. Employees standing nearby stopped in their tracks. Rick's face drained of color. "You're joking," Rick muttered. This isn't..." "I've been here for 2 days," Daniel said, "and I've seen enough." He stepped closer. "You've bullied your staff, manipulated payroll, and created a workplace where people are scared just to do their jobs." Rick's jaw clenched. I was just keeping things efficient. You know how hard it is to make budget." "Don't," Daniel interrupted. his voice dangerously calm. I built this company on respect and fairness. You took advantage of people who needed this job, and you did it for your own gain. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Rick could hear. You're fired. Effective immediately. Rick's face turned red. You can't just... I can, Daniel said. And I just did. Now get out. After Rick stormed out, Daniel gathered the employees in the break room. They stood silently, still stunned. I know this has been a tough place to work, Daniel began, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, but starting today, things are going to change. He paused, scanning their faces. Every employee who had hours unfairly cut will get those wages back. Breaks will be mandatory, and if you ever feel mistreated again, by anyone, you have a direct line to my office. The employees exchanged uncertain glances, as though afraid to believe him. Most importantly, Daniel added, I'm promoting someone who's been stepping up, even when it wasn't her job. Alyssa. Her eyes widened. Me. You've kept this place afloat despite everything Rick threw at you, Daniel said. I want you to be the new shift leader, someone who'll put people first. Alyssa's face broke into a stunned smile, and her co-workers clapped and cheered. For the first time since Daniel walked into the store, the air felt lighter, like the weight of fear had finally lifted. As Daniel walked out of the break room, Marcus caught up to him. Thanks, he said, for listening, for helping us. I should have known sooner, Daniel replied, but you all deserved better. Now, you're going to get it. The morning after Rick's firing, Daniel walked into the fast food restaurant not as Dave the trainee, but as Daniel Prescott, CEO of Griddle King. He wasn't here to watch quietly from the sidelines anymore. Now, he had work to do. The employees barely made eye contact as Daniel walked past the counter. Even with Rick gone, the air still felt heavy. Fear lingered like a bad odor, one that wouldn't disappear overnight. He knew changing that culture would take time and trust. The broken team in the break room, Daniel found Alyssa sitting, alone with her coffee, her uniform still wrinkled from the hectic morning shift. She didn't look up until Daniel spoke. Hey, Daniel said softly. Got a minute? Alyssa's fingers tightened around her cup. I know I'm supposed to lead now, but I don't know if I can. I think you can, Daniel said, pulling up a chair. But you're not doing this alone. Alyssa exhaled heavily. People are still scared, she admitted. Rick's gone, but nobody trusts that things are really going to change. We've been burned before. I get that, Daniel said, but that's exactly why we're starting fresh, and I need your help. Facing the staff later that afternoon, Daniel gathered the entire staff in the dining area. The employees stood awkwardly in small groups, whispering among themselves. Jose leaned against the wall, still favoring his injured ankle. Marcus stood near Alyssa, looking wary. I know you're tired, Daniel began, and I know some of you are wondering if things are really going to change. But I'm here to tell you, they are. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Starting today, every employee whose hours were unfairly cut will get those wages back. If you were forced to work off the clock, that money's coming back to you, and no one will be punished for speaking up. The room was silent. Some employees exchanged cautious glances. They wanted to believe him, but Daniel could see the doubt in their eyes. I get it, Daniel continued. I know Rick made you feel like your jobs were on the line, and I know some of you think I'll forget about this place in a few weeks. But I won't. Starting today, there's a direct hotline in place, to me personally. If something's wrong, you tell me, and I promise I'll listen. Finally, Marcus spoke up. Yeah? What about Jose? He's been limping for weeks. Rick made him work through it. Jose, Daniel said, turning to him. Go home, now. Take the time you need. And when you're ready to come back, your hours will be here waiting. Full pay, no penalties. Jose's eyes widened. Really? Really? Daniel said firmly. The first time since Daniel had arrived, the tension in the room seemed to ease, just a little. Restoring order over the next few days, Daniel worked side by side with the employees. He ran the grill with Marcus, helped Jose restock shelves, and took orders with Alyssa. He learned their struggles firsthand. The broken equipment Rick never bothered to replace, the supply orders that always arrived short, and the impossible closing shifts that left employees exhausted. Rick never cared about this stuff, Marcus said as they repaired a busted freezer door. He just wanted the place to look good when the district manager showed up. Well, Daniel said, tightening a bolt. It's time we started running things the right way. The following Friday, Daniel noticed Marcus lingering near the back exit during his break, scrolling through his phone. Something seemed off. Everything okay? Daniel asked, approaching him. Yeah, Marcus hesitated. My brother's watching my niece tonight. He's been covering for me a lot lately, since I've been stuck here late. Did Rick mess with your schedule too? Daniel asked. Marcus let out a dry laugh. He used to put me on closing shifts like 3 days in. A row. I couldn't even pick her up from daycare sometimes. He paused. I almost quit last month because of it. Daniel's chest tightened. That's not happening again, he promised. If you ever need time off for family, you'll get it. No questions asked. Marcus smiled, clearly relieved. Thanks, he muttered. I mean, really. Thanks. The real test the next Saturday was one of the busiest mornings the store had seen in months. The drive-thru was packed, the lobby full, and online orders flooded in non-stop. The employees scrambled to keep up. But this time, there was no shouting, no panic. Instead, Daniel watched as Alyssa took charge. She calmly assigned roles, redirected Marcus to bag orders, and stepped in to help Jose at the grill when things got chaotic. Customers were greeted with smiles, and the crew worked like a team, something Daniel hadn't seen since walking through those doors. By noon, the rush had finally slowed. As the last customer walked out, the employees exchanged tired smiles. Nice work today, Daniel said. You should all be proud. We couldn't have done it without Alyssa, Jose chimed in. She kept things from going crazy. She's a natural, Marcus added. Alyssa's face reddened, but she smiled. I just didn't want to let anyone down. You didn't, Daniel said, warmly. You stepped up when this team needed you most. Later that afternoon, Daniel stood by the window, watching as Marcus helped an elderly customer carry her food to her car. Jose was smiling again, laughing with co-workers. And Alyssa, she was chatting easily with her team, no longer the nervous, anxious employee she'd once been. This is what it's supposed to feel like, Daniel muttered to himself. For the first time in weeks, he felt like his restaurant was finally back on track. This is only the beginning, Daniel whispered. But it's a start. The morning sun spilled through the front windows of Griddle King as Daniel stood quietly by the entrance, observing the flow of his restaurant. The atmosphere was completely different from when he first arrived. The tense silence had been replaced with quiet conversations, soft laughter, and employees who moved with purpose. Not fear, but Daniel knew there was still more work to be done. Today wasn't just about fixing broken systems. It was about giving his employees the security they deserved. Starting fresh in the break room, Daniel gathered the staff together. Faces that once wore exhaustion and anxiety now looked hopeful, but cautious. Old wounds didn't heal overnight. I know things are better now, Daniel began, but better isn't good enough. I want this store to be a place you're proud to work, a place where you're supported, respected, and safe. He paused, letting his words sink in. So, starting today, I'm putting new policies in place to make sure what happened here never happens again. The room went quiet. First, Daniel continued, everyone who worked under Rick and had their wages cut unfairly is receiving a full reimbursement, paid in cash by the end of the week. A few gasps echoed from the back of the room. Jose blinked in disbelief. Second, Daniel added, Griddle King is establishing a hardship fund for employees who need extra support during tough times. No strings attached. Whether it's a medical bill, car trouble, or a family emergency, we'll be here to help. Alyssa shifted in her seat, her eyes wide. Lastly, Daniel said firmly, we're creating a peer leadership team. This team will include employees like you, people who know what happens in this store every day. If there's a problem, if someone feels unheard or mistreated, you'll have a voice. The room remained still for a moment. Then quiet murmurs began to spread. Relief, hope, maybe even excitement. I'm trusting you, Daniel said. And if anyone tries to abuse this system like Rick did, I expect you to tell me. He smiled softly. Because you deserve better than what you've been through. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel made himself a constant presence in the store. He worked shifts alongside employees, taking the time to understand their daily struggles. He helped Marcus reorganize the supply room, clearing out clutter Rick had ignored for months. He spent hours with Jose, learning the finer points of the grill station, and insisted Jose take proper breaks to rest his still healing ankle. And he spent countless hours with Alyssa, coaching her on leadership strategies while encouraging her to trust her instincts. One afternoon, Daniel found Alyssa in the office, reviewing the schedule. She sat with a notepad in hand, carefully adjusting shifts to better accommodate employees who had kids, school, or second jobs. Looks good, Daniel said from the doorway. You're really stepping up. Alyssa smiled faintly. I want things to be fair. No one should feel like they're drowning just to make ends meet. You're making that happen, Daniel said. And I couldn't be prouder. Change wasn't instant. Some employees still struggled to trust management. Customers occasionally asked why the old manager wasn't around anymore. And there were still days when things went wrong. Orders got mixed up, rush hours turned chaotic, and frustrations boiled over. But this time, the staff worked together. Alyssa's calm leadership kept tensions low. Jose, now feeling confident again, jumped in when teammates struggled. And Marcus, once quiet and overlooked, had grown into a reliable, respected presence behind the counter. One evening, Daniel stopped by the store to see Alyssa coaching a new trainee, a nervous teenager named Jenna. Jenna struggled with the register, her hands shaking as she tried to count change for a customer. It's okay, Alyssa said gently, stepping beside her. Breathe. Take your time. Jenna exhaled shakily and tried again. The customer smiled, thanked her, and walked away with their order. Jenna turned to Alyssa, her face still flushed. I thought I was going to screw that up, Jenna said quietly. You didn't, Alyssa replied. And if you ever need help, just ask. Daniel stood back, smiling to himself. This was what he had hoped for, a team that looked out for each other. 2 weeks later, Daniel returned to the store for one final visit. This time, he didn't go inside. He sat in his car across the street and just watched. Through the window, he saw Marcus laughing with Jose as they cleaned the soda machine. He spotted Jenna at the register, smiling confidently as she greeted a customer. And finally, he saw Alyssa, clipboard in hand, chatting with an elderly woman while helping her pack her order. The woman laughed, and Alyssa smiled wide, a smile that showed pride, comfort, and peace. Daniel knew then that this wasn't just his store anymore. It belonged to them. The employees had claimed it back, rebuilding it into something stronger, something better. With a satisfied smile, Daniel started his car. They've got this, he muttered to himself. I know they do.